Then Stolaniv Walt Henderson knocked on my door, pipe tobacco mixing with cool night air as he spoke in concerned whispers. Decide. This Bryn woman's been systematically concentrated on people. Bear in mind the Rodriguez family. Force them to put off their Virgin of Guadalupe lawn statue. Known as a non-conforming, non-secular imagery, $800 in fines before they in the end sold and moved away. My judicial instincts kicked in. What else? Unmarried mother down the road got fined for her children chalk art on their very own driveway. Stated it become defacing not unusual place, aesthetics. We are talking approximately rainbows and hopscotch squares. Decide. The sample crystallized like evidence falling into area at some point of final arguments. Bryn wasn't just focused on me. She became strolling a systematic harassment marketing campaign against everybody who did not match her suburban grasp race myth. Hispanic households, unmarried moms, elderly citizens on constant earning, and now a widowed decide who'd previously dominated towards her husband's contractor scams. This turned into discrimination wrapped in HOA bureaucracy subsidized with the aid of fraudulent documentation and unlawful great systems. I might stumbled into this center of a miles larger crook company that made my fence dispute seem like jaywalking. The scratching sound of my pen documenting these revelations crammed Harold's quiet office. He'd always stated correct criminal strategy became like surgical treatment. Unique, methodical, and devastatingly effective, whilst achieved well. I used to be approximately to perform important surgery on Ben Ashworth Sterling's little state of petty tyranny. She'd made the traditional mistake of focused on someone who understood precisely the way to dismantle her operation, piece by piece, the use of the same legal gadget she'd been bastardizing for her non-public vendettas. Harold used a comic story that judges have been simply referees with law stages and everlasting attitudes. Time to show this UA Karen what happens while you pick a combat with a person who writes the rules of engagement for residing. Bryn's subsequent flow crossed the road from harassment into criminal territory. The girl had seemingly decided that if synthetic violations weren't working, actual breaking and getting into may ship a more potent message. She struck even as I used to be downtown sentencing a wife beater to 18 months. My safety cameras captured every criminal second of her emergency property inspection, a criminal authority that existed handiest in her delusional imagination. There she became, bold as brass in fashion designer yoga pants, strutting via my backyard like she'd offered the deed, pink tape degree in hand, photographing the entirety from angles that could embarrass a paparazzi stalker. The audacity peaked when she pressed her face towards my kitchen window, shading her eyes to look inside at Harold's espresso mug, nevertheless sitting at the counter, the one I could not bring myself to clean. But Bryn's criminal stupidity reached new heights while she deliberately left my lower back gate wide open, now not by chance intentionally. The security footage showed her yanking it open, checking to make certain the latch wouldn't seize, then on foot away with a glad smirk. The glad smirk. After I arrived domestic that evening, bone worn out from being attentive to home violence testimony, I discovered my sanctuary violated and my worst nightmare found out gavel was lacking. This 14-year-old tabby wasn't only a pet. He turned into Harold's very last gift to me. Rescued from the courthouse automobile parking space all through a thunderstorm 3 years ago. The cat who'd sat on Harold's lap for the duration of chemo remedies, purring consolation into his ache. My remaining living connection to 28 years of marriage, the panic hit like a physical blow. The complaint hit my table through licensed mail on Tuesday morning. Reputable Colorado Judicial Subject Commission letterhead that made my coffee flavor like ash. Bryn's allegations study like fiction. Choose Blackwood abuses judicial authority to intimidate law-abiding house owners, weaponizing the legal system for non-public vendettas that threaten network protection. The supporting proof become crook in its creativity. Doctored images displaying my memorial lawn as some type of neighborhood blight. Falsified witness statements from her clothier and trainer claiming I might threaten them, and timestamps that would make a CSI tech weep with laughter. But Bryn's nuclear alternative, she'd leaked everything to political blogs that antagonistic my preceding environmental rulings. Inside hours, I was trending as liberal judge terrorizes patriotic HOA. Comment sections exploded with keyboard warriors disturbing my impeachment, disbarment, and innovative suggestions approximately what must show up to activist judges who hate the USA. For 72 hours, I watched 20 years of judicial provider get shredded with the aid of individuals who couldn't spell jurisprudence. But by some means understood constitutional regulation higher than federal judges. Then my salvation arrived within the form of a silver-haired woman wearing self-made cookies. Patricia Pat Donnelly seemed like absolutely everyone's retired librarian, practical cardigan, orthopedic footwear, arms that trembled slightly with age. What she didn't seem like was a 12 months FBI veteran who'd specialized in economic crimes and had apparently been engaging in surveillance on Bryn for weeks. "Judge, I assume you ought to see this," she stated, settling into Harold's chair with the calm self-belief of someone used to handing over existence. Changing information. Pat spread photographs throughout my kitchen desk like gambling cards in a excessive stakes recreation. Meet Bethany Sterling of Phoenix, Arizona. 3 coverage claims in 2 years, mysterious flood, handy electrical fireplace, and wonderful vandalism. 400 in payouts disappeared right before the grand jury convened. My judicial education kicked in. Spotting patterns like DNA proof. She's done this before. Textbook operation. Target hooked up neighborhoods, create conflicts to justify claims, vanish before investigations finish. Pat's FBI instincts had been surgical sharp no matter retirement. However, here's the stunning part. She filed her contemporary house owner's software under false identification. It's federal mail fraud. The documents Pat produced made my prosecutor's heart sing. Bryn's cutting-edge policy valued her $800,000 residence at $2.08 million. Her application contained lies about previous claims, identification adjustments, and economic history that might make federal prosecutors weep with joy. "She's now not harassing you due to antique grudges," Pat persisted, organizing proof with expert precision. "You are the distraction." Maintain all and sundry targeted on HOA drama, whilst she embezzles association budget and sets up the subsequent accidental fireplace. The revelation hit like a judicial gavel to the skull. This wasn't private revenge. It became criminal misdirection. While I would been fighting fence violations, Bryn had been draining HOA emergency budget and getting ready insurance fraud that might devastate the whole network. Pat exceeded me in manila folder thick sufficient to choke a defense, legal, professional. Sterling top-class builders filed financial ruin closing month. Colorado suspended their license for tax evasion. The HOA presidency was by no means about neighborhood control. It became about having access to network price range for personal use. My harassment wasn't random focused on. It changed into professional distraction, preserving a federal decide busy with petty disputes at the same time as she systematically robbed our community blind. However, Pat's final revelation made my blood freeze. She's already filed initial insurance claims for growing structural issues and increasing neighborhood protection issues. Your private home is not only a gold shoes, it's scheduled to be proof in her next coverage scam. That night, I sat surrounded by means of proof that converted my private nightmare into a federal RICO case. Bank information showing $340,000 lacking from HOA's insurance packages containing sufficient lies to trigger perjury fees, a sample of focused on minorities and elderly citizens that screamed civil rights violations. Bryn hadn't picked me because I'd dominated towards her husband. She'd chosen me because terrorizing a federal decide created ideal cowl for systematic theft and fraud instruction. However, in her crook arrogance, she'd made one catastrophic miscalculation. In preference to targeting helpless aged residents, she determined to run federal crimes in opposition to a person who understood precisely a way to dismantle criminal establishments. The use of each tool within the federal prison arsenal. The gentle glow of my computer display illuminated Harold's office as I started out drafting communications to federal prosecutors who specialized in interstate fraud and civil rights violations. My husband continually stated that endurance wasn't only a distinctive feature. It became a weapon while wielded by using someone who understood timing. Ben Ashworth Sterling was approximately to analyze that running insurance scams whilst terrorizing a federal judge wasn't just stupid. It changed into lifestyle sentence silly. Time to show this suburban criminal what federal justice appeared like when it was private. The manila envelope Pat slid throughout my kitchen desk felt heavier than a dying sentence. In her have been snapshots that made my hands tremble and my prosecutor's instincts scream in popularity. Decide what I'm approximately to reveal you adjustments the entirety, Pat said, her voice carrying the load of 25 years searching federal criminals. Ben Ashworth Sterling does not exist. The primary image showed a California driving forces license from 2018. Rebecca Ashworth with Bryn's face smiling lower back at me. The second one revealed Beth Sterling from Phoenix. Same female, different identity. The 1-3 made my espresso cup slip from numb arms. Sandra McKenzie from Detroit, dated 2010, with a federal prisoner identity number stamped across the lowest. She's a professional network destroyer, Pat defined, organizing proof with surgical precision. 4 states, 6 identities, systematic HOA infiltration, observed by embezzlement and insurance fraud. She's stolen over $4 million inside the beyond decade. My judicial training kicked in. However, the personal horror made my voice crack. How many households has she destroyed? 15 showed. Usually the same sample. Target established neighborhoods, create harassment campaigns against minorities and aged residents, embezzle emergency finances, then torch excessive price homes for insurance payouts. Pat's FBI instincts had been razor sharp in spite of retirement. Docor. In Sacramento, 3 Hispanic families were pushed out before the community center mysteriously burned. Phoenix lost 5 aged citizens to stress-related fitness issues in the course of her reign of terror. The next file made my blood freeze strong. Architectural plans for my residence acquired through Sterling top-class builder contractor database marked with targeted notes, approximately electrical vulnerabilities, foundation get entry to points, and most beneficial fireplace acceleration styles. She's been planning to burn your own home down because day one, Pat stated quietly. Turned into misdirection while she organized the suitable arson. Your home is worth $180,000. However, Harold's Lifestyle's coverage enhancements driven the rebuild price to $320,000. She's making plans to say fire unfold to her assets, triggering each rules for maximum payout. My fingers shook as I traced Harold's electric upgrade notes inside the margins. Work we might finish together all through his very last months, trying to create lasting improvements to our sanctuary. Bryn had turned our love into her crook opportunity. Her Pat's final revelation shattered each assumption I had made approximately this example. She's no longer only a crook judge. She's a federal fugitive running below stolen identities while technically nevertheless in witness protection. Ben McKenzie testified in opposition to a Detroit fraud ring in 2012. Forgiven 18 months federal time, then disappeared from the system in 2015. The results hit like a judicial gavel to the cranium. TR. This lady became running organized crime operations whilst covered with the aid of federal witness programs, stealing taxpayer-funded identities to devote the exact crimes she'd supposedly reformed from. The witness safety violation by myself carries 10 years federal minimum, Pat continued. Upload the multi-kingdom fraud conspiracy, identification robbery, and now attempted arson against a federal choose. She's looking at life without parole. I stared at images of households she'd destroyed, communities she'd devastated, aged citizens who died from stress-precipitated heart attacks at some stage in her harassment campaigns. My private nightmare became simply the trendy chapter in a decade-lengthy federal crime spree. The musty smell of old case files combined with the bitter flavor of betrayal as I realized the scope of Bryn's criminal organization. She hadn't centered me because of antique grudges. She'd researched my husband's death, my financial vulnerability, my judicial agenda, and my emotional attachments to create the right sufferer profile. But, in her crook conceitedness, she'd made one catastrophic miscalculation. She'd selected to run federal crimes in opposition to someone who understood precisely the way to coordinate multi-jurisdictional prosecutions with each federal enterprise from FBI to Treasury. Time to show this professional predator what federal justice looked like while it was personal, permanent, and without a doubt cruel. My kitchen transformed right into a federal battle room quicker than you could say Rico conspiracy. By using Thursday nighttime, Pat, Walt, and attorney Rebecca Morgan sat round Harold's desk like avenging angels planning biblical justice, surrounded via evidence bins that could bury Bryn's criminal empire 6 bay underground. Rebecca Morgan became a criminal predator in fashion designer suits. Former federal prosecutor grew to become white-collar defense attorney, who'd by no means misplaced a RICO case and had apparently been waiting her entire career for a villain this flawlessly prosecutable. She'd pushed down from Denver with 3 paralegals and enough prison firepower to flatten a small dictatorship. Judge, we are no longer simply prosecuting neighborhood harassment, Rebecca introduced, spreading color-coded flowcharts throughout my desk like battle plans for international warfare too. 2. We are dismantling a decade-lengthy federal crime spree. It's destroyed 15 communities and they're $4 million. The smell of sparkling legal files combined with Walt's pipe tobacco, as we mentioned, our 3-pronged attack. Federal annihilation, nation prosecution, and civil rights demolition. Rebecca's approach becomes surgical in its precision and biblical in its scope. Federal expenses first. Mail fraud throughout state lines incorporates 20-year minimums. Wire fraud for electronic HOA theft adds another 20. Identification robbery using witness safety programs 10 years mandatory. So, Draco conspiracy for systematic network destruction. Life without parole. She smiled like a sharking blood. Or speak me about federal sentences that'll preserve her locked up until climate change drowns the jail. Pat coordinated federal employer involvement with retired FBI performance that made modern retailers appear like mall safety. Colorado Bureau of Research, Treasury Economic Crimes, FBI Interstate Fraud Venture Force. They may be all drooling over the situation. By it tomorrow morning, Bryn could have extra federal surveillance than a terrorist mobile. My function became evidence protection and victim coordination, abilities I might perfected during 2 decades of complex crook cases. During regulation faculty, I'd memorized every provision of Colorado's Open Data Act after my slumlord attempted hiding financial data. HOA price range had been absolutely obvious to network individuals who knew a way to request them properly. We had been approximately to call for 5 years of distinctive accounting and watch Bryn's embezzlement empire fall apart underneath public scrutiny. Walt's community intelligence community became our secret weapon. 60 years of neighborhood relationships had created a fax web that would make the CIA jealous. Each circle of relatives Bryn's terrorized is documenting everything, he stated, organizing sufferer statements with Army precision. Mrs. Rodriguez is using return from Phoenix with 17 witnesses. The Johnson circle of relatives is retaining incapacity discrimination statistics that'll make federal prosecutors weep with joy. But our maximum enjoyable guidance was the technical surveillance upgrade. Pat had transformed my modest safety system into federal evidence series machinery capable of recording crimes in court-satisfactory detail. Every digicam angle was calibrated for max prosecutorial impact. Here's the lovely part. Pat defined at the same time as trying out audio gadget that could seize conversations 3 homes away. Bryn's actively committing fresh crimes whilst we are constructing the case. Every fraudulent first class, each harassment letter, each OA fund transfer creates real-time proof for federal prosecutors. Rebecca handled immediate legal safety with the ruthless performance of someone who'd specialized in destroying white-collar criminals. Emergency injunctions freeze a bunny owed day after today morning. Crook lawsuits hit 3 jurisdictions simultaneously. Civil rights violations filed with Colorado legal professional well known for systematic concentrated on based on ethnicity and age. The economic implications were similarly devastating for Bryn's operation. I would learn for the duration of my judicial profession that the House Owners Safety Act required insurance businesses to notify mortgage holders approximately fraud investigations. Bryn's coverage scams could trigger audits of every Pinewood policy, potentially saving acquaintances hundreds of lots and top rate increases whilst destroying her credibility with each insurance company in the USA. Sir, our emergency protocols recounted that cornered criminals became desperately risky. Rebecca had organized defensive surveillance for susceptible residents, consisting of elderly associates and households with small youngsters. We might discovered from federal instances that methodical fraudsters often escalated to violence when going through existence sentences. Through nighttime, we might constructed a criminal system designed for whole annihilation of Bryn's crook enterprise with most protection for every sufferer she'd terrorized. The precision changed into stunning, the scope became overwhelming, and the final results turned into inevitable. Whilst we're completed, Rebecca summarized with prosecutorial satisfaction, Ben McKenzie will spend her final years in federal most protection. Sterling Premium Builders gets liquidated for victim restitution. Each stressed resident receives reimbursement plus punitive damages. And we set up criminal precedents defensive communities nationwide from comparable predators. The quiet hum of my upgraded safety device blended with the smooth click of my keyboard as I drafted victim effect statements designed to make federal judges call for most sentences. Harold constantly said that persistence wasn't just a virtue. It changed into a weapon when mixed with overwhelming criminal pressure carried out at exactly the right mental second. Tomorrow morning, professional criminal Bryn Ashworth Sterling could find out that terrorizing a federal judge's community wasn't simply catastrophically stupid. It changed into lifestyle sentence making sure, legacy destroying, federal prison ensuring stupid. Time to execute justice with severe legal prejudice. Bryn's reaction to our legal offensive proved she'd graduated from petty harassment to full-blown home terrorism. Her desperation became about to show my neighborhood into against the law scene that could make federal prosecutors salivate. The attack came Tuesday afternoon whilst I used to be downtown sentencing a wife-beater. Perfect alibi timing that Bryn had simply researched through my public court agenda. My Navy-grade security device captured every felonious second in evidence, high-quality excessive definition. 2:47 p.m., unmarked trucks discouraged a crew that moved with expert efficiency. Those weren't landscapers. They were arson specialists sporting coveralls and carrying gadget designed for one purpose, turning my residence into a coverage hearth that would spread to Bryn's belongings for maximum payout. The cameras recorded them growing accelerant highways around my foundation, installing unmarked propane connections close to electric panels, and positioning useless plants in styles that might guarantee fireplace spread towards Bryn's $1,000,000 target. The precision become chilling, the crook intent obvious, and the federal proof best surely devastating. However, Bryn's nuclear stage stupidity peaked whilst she arrived with Channel 7's news crew, claiming she'd received anonymous tips about dangerous fire hazards at the Decide's residence. Network protection is my best concern, she told Sarah Morgan while standing without delay over planted proof of her personal arson conspiracy. When public officers forget about fireplace prevention, harmless pals ought to die. The brass balls have been remarkable. Yeah, the federal expenses would be biblical. My phone erupted with calls from Pat's surveillance network. Walt had photographed the complete team from multiple angles. Mrs. Rodriguez had recorded license plates that could make police lineups unnecessary. Even our postal employee had documented suspicious interest at the same time as turning in what could become the ultimate mail my residents would possibly ever receive. Then, Fire Marshal Jake Morrison arrived for Bryn's requested safety inspection. Morrison became a 30-12 months arson investigation veteran whose educated eye spotted planted proof faster than a federal prosecutor spots plea bargains. Decide, he stated quietly, kneeling beside manifestly synthetic accelerant styles. Someone's putting in place your property to burn. This is not code violation. That is premeditated murder. The soil analysis could later display professionally carried out fireplace accelerants. Fuel connections violated 16 protection codes and bore fingerprints that matched Sterling Top Rate's contractor database. The placement patterns indicated expert understanding of fire behavior, coverage investigation processes, and exactly the way to create unintended blazes that could trigger most payouts. Whoever planned this knows a way to kill human beings and make it appear like electric malfunction. Morrison persisted, his expert disgust palpable. Those aren't random protection troubles. This is systematic training for insurance fraud through murder. However, Bryn's desperation reached crook crescendo whilst Morrison refused to condemn my belongings based totally on planted proof. Professional arsonists had turned my home into a controlled demolition disguised as electrical malfunction, the usage of techniques that assured maximum destruction and most reliable insurance timing. But Bryn's criminal overconfidence had simply created the most beautiful lure in federal prosecution history. I stood on Walt's porch in Harold's vintage bathrobe, looking our lifestyles burn at the same time as federal arson investigator Marcus Webb coordinated a crime scene that looked like domestic terrorism. Judge, this wasn't random, he stated grimly. Thermal imaging revealing accelerant patterns that shape best fire highways. A person desired you useless and wanted it to look unintended. The proof changed into overwhelming and flawlessly preserved. My safety machine had survived in fireproof housing, capturing each criminal second. Sterling top rates team coming into at 2:45 a.m., accompanied by means of Bryn's husband carrying professional hearth acceleration system at 3:10 a.m. But the smoking gun came from an unexpected supply. Coverage investigator Jennifer Park determined that Bryn had filed preliminary harm claims for hearth spreading from neighboring property at 2:30 a.m. 47 minutes earlier than my residence changed into truly ignited. She submitted office work claiming her residence could suffer fireplace damage earlier than your property was even burning. Park defined with prosecutorial pride. It is now not prediction. It truly is documentary proof of premeditated murder. The community reaction became immediate and overwhelming. Friends seemed with espresso, blankets, and righteous fury that made federal sellers take notes. Mrs. Rodriguez grabbed my hands with tears streaming. Mija, she tried to kill you. We all saw her making plans this murder. Then came the moment that could stay for all time in federal prosecution legend. Bryn really confirmed up on the fire scene. The girl regarded in dressmaker athleisure and full makeup at 4:30 a.m., expressing deep community challenge to information cameras even as status 50F from the house she just had torched. Her overall performance was Academy Award caliber in its complete sociopathic detachment from truth. This tragic accident reinforces why our HOA must hold strict protection requirements, she informed Channel 7 with theatrical grief. Decide Blackwood's resistance to right inspections may have contributed to this devastating loss of existence. What she didn't comprehend became that FBI dealers had been recording every word for her eventual homicide trial, at the same time as federal marshals had been already getting ready, dawn arrest warrants based on evidence so overwhelming that plea deals were mathematically impossible. The monetary investigation revealed crook genius wrapped in homicidal stupidity. Bryn had embezzled $340,000 from HOA price range to finance professional arson. Her coverage policy valued her house at $2, $8 million no matter, buying it for $800,000. The spreading hearth harm she'd pre-filed might have caused payouts exceeding a few United States of America's annual budgets. However, federal prosecutors were monitoring each transaction for the reason that Pat's investigation began. Financial institution records showed payments to regarded arsonists. Cell phone information placed both criminals on the scene in the course of ignition. Insurance packages contained enough lies to guarantee perjury convictions in all 50 states. Rebecca Morgan's response was rapid and biblical. Federal marshals arrested each Ashworth stirrings in the course of dawn raids broadcast live on countrywide TV. Property seized beneath RICO forfeit would compensate victims from 4 states. Sterling premium changed into liquidated quicker than evidence in a shredder. The expenses were existence, sentence lovely attempted murder of a federal choose, first diploma arson, insurance fraud throughout a couple of jurisdictions, cash laundering, crook conspiracy, and RICO violations that might maintain them locked up until archaeologists found their skeletons. That nighttime, I sat in Walt's kitchen, surrounded by federal marketers who'd traveled from more than one state to coordinate the largest HOA fraud prosecution in American records. The smoke smell nevertheless clung to my garments, however it now not smelled like destruction. It smelled like justice being organized at most temperature. My residence changed into long gone, but Harold's memory lived in the community that had protected me when his sanctuary couldn't. Bryn had attempted to homicide me in my sleep and ended up creating federal proof that could maintain her locked away until the solar burned out. Tender sound of handcuffs clicking on news photos felt like Harold whispering approval from anything legal afterlife. Judges inhabit. A few battles had been really worth losing the whole thing to win permanently. Day after day, domestic terrorist Bryn Ashworth Sterling might discover that attempting to murder a federal judge carried consequences that lasted longer than existence sentences. 7 days after my residence had become a criminal offense scene, Bryn Ashworth Sterling walked into my court docket in federal custody, orange jumpsuit replacing dressmaker athleisure, facing prices that would preserve her locked up till archaeologists found her remains. On. The irony turned into so ideal it felt like Harold had orchestrated it from the afterlife. My court docket became packed past potential, status room most effective with overflow crowds watching live streams, out of doors. Federal marshals, FBI agents, insurance investigators, and prosecutors from 4 states stuffed the gallery like a navy of justice preparing for biblical struggle. Channel 7 had cameras positioned for maximum dramatic impact. The Colorado legal professional standard sat inside the front row, taking notes for civil rights legislation. Maximum beautifully, 17 households Bryn had terrorized have been gift as witnesses, which include Mrs. Rodriguez, the Johnson-owned family with their disabled son, and elderly citizens who'd been pushed from their homes by her systematic harassment campaigns. So, Judge Patricia Morrison, my colleague who'd agreed to deal with the arraignment after my recusal, known as the court docket to reserve with the gravity befitting a home terrorism case. The people of Colorado as opposed to Ben McKenzie, additionally known as Bethany Sterling, additionally referred to as Rebecca Ashworth, additionally known as Sandra Mitchell. The listing of false identities took 30 seconds to read. The criminal fees took 4 minutes. Attempted murder of a federal decide, first-degree arson, insurance fraud throughout a couple of states, money laundering, crook conspiracy, RICO violations, identification robbery, witness protection fraud, and systematic civil rights violations. Bryn's attorney, a public defender who'd truly drawn the shortest straw in prison history, asked affordable bond primarily based on her community ties and absence of flight danger. Federal prosecutor Amanda Stevens stood with the delight of someone holding royal flushes in a poker recreation. Your Honor, the defendant has operated beneath 6 false identities across 4 states while stealing over $4 million and destroying 15 groups. She attempted to homicide a sitting federal, decide by means of burning down her residence. Appeared on television, claiming the victim had prompted her personal near-demise revel-in. The gallery murmured with righteous anger that made federal marshals shift nervously. But the second that might be replayed on felony documentaries for many years came whilst Bryn made the catastrophic decision to address the court. Without delay. Your Honor, she stated, turning toward me with the unbroken arrogance of a sociopath who still didn't understand the scope of her destruction. Choose Blackwood has used her function to orchestrate a vendetta in opposition to regulation. Abiding homeowners. She's weaponized the federal government towards citizens exercise legitimate HOA authority. Authority. This complete prosecution is judicial abuse masquerading as justice. The silence in my court docket became deafening. Federal sellers exchanged glances that promised additional charges. Prosecutors scribbled notes frantically. The gallery held its collective breath, awaiting judicial reaction. Choose Morrison's voice carried 20 years of federal bench authority when she spoke back. Miss McKenzie, you stand accused of attempting to homicide a federal decide through burning down her residence whilst she slept. You embezzled masses of thousands of bucks from community emergency price range. You operated under fake identities while terrorizing aged and minority citizens. You filed fraudulent coverage claims totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars throughout more than one state. She paused, letting the load of federal justice settle over the court docket like a burial shroud. The evidence towards you consists of protection photos of the arson, recorded bribery tries, documented harassment campaigns, financial data of systematic theft, and insurance programs containing lies that constitute federal perjury. You are not a sufferer of judicial vendetta. You are a domestic terrorist who centered a federal judge's community for systematic destruction. The mic drop moment got here while Morrison endured. Moreover, this court docket has reviewed evidence which you've destroyed 15 groups and displaced over 200 families via equal fraud schemes. Your pattern of concentrated on elderly and minority citizens constitutes systematic civil rights violations with a view to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law. Bryn's face crumpled because the fact of life sentences crashed via her sociopathic delusions. Her legal professional whispered frantically approximately, plea bargains that everyone knew had been mathematically not possible given the overpowering evidence. Bond is denied, Choose Morrison declared with finality that echoed through packed galleries. Voice. The defendant poses an extreme flight hazard and chance to network protection. Remand to federal custody pending trial. The gallery erupted in applause that federal marshals didn't even try and suppress. Mrs. Rodriguez sobbed with alleviation. Walt pumped his fist like his crew had received the arena collection. 17 households who'd been terrorized through Bryn's crook employer sooner or later witnessed justice being served at most temperature. As federal marshals led Bryn away in chains, she grew to become toward me one very last time with hatred that could have powered small towns. This isn't over, Judge. You'll by no means show I specifically targeted you for murder. The courtroom fell silent as I stood, black gowns carrying 2 decades of federal authority, and brought the words that would near this bankruptcy of home terrorism for all time. Mrs. Mackenzie, the court unearths your confession that this turned into certainly centered harassment to be duly stated for sentencing functions. Federal prosecutors now have documented admission of premeditated rationale. Thank you for doing away with any remaining affordable doubt. The sound of justice being served echoed via my court-like herald's final approval. 2 years later, I stood in my rebuilt kitchen watching Cardinals feast at Harold's memorial feeder at the same time as federal most protection served Bryn Mackenzie her daily supporting of justice. Life without parole in a concrete container wherein home terrorists ponder their existence alternatives for eternity. The flavor of morning espresso blended with the sweet pride of watching evil get exactly what it deserved. The criminal trials have been prosecutors' desires and defense lawyers' nightmares. Federal juries took 3 hours and 47 minutes to convict both Ashworth Stirrings on all counts. Apparently, they had needed time for lunch. Bryn acquired existence without parole for attempted murder of a federal choose, plus consecutive sentences for arson, fraud, and civil rights violations that could preserve her locked up till climate change turned Colorado into beachfront property. Her husband earned 25 years for conspiracy, making sure Sterling Top Class's criminal organization became permanently extinct. The $3.2 million in seized property had been distributed to sufferers across 4 states, developing the largest HOA fraud restitution in American legal history. Each targeted circle of relatives obtained compensation plus punitive damages that set up criminal precedents, defensive groups nationwide from destiny predators. But the actual victory lived in Pinewood's transformation from terrorized state to virgin community that law colleges now studied. Walt Henderson reigned as unanimously elected HOA president, enforcing transparency measures that made embezzlement impossible and resident protections ensuring due process for destiny disputes. Our reformed bylaws required community popularity of fines over $50, monthly financial reports published online, and obligatory mediation before felony motion. Most fantastically, systematic concentrated on primarily based on ethnicity, age, or financial status was explicitly prohibited with automatic removal for violating board contributors. Colorado's Pinewood Protection Act required HOA monetary transparency, constrained first-rate authority, and set up state oversight for groups with systematic grievance styles. 15 other states followed similar regulation, shielding thousands and thousands from future Ben Mackenzies, even as their inspiration rotted in federal prison. The Choose Harold Blackwood Memorial Scholarship had grown past our wildest desires. Documentary rights, ebook sales, and donations from thankful groups had raised $750,000 assisting First Technology College students reading network law and civil rights. This year's celebrity recipient became Maria Rodriguez, daughter of the family Bryn had terrorized, now heading to Harvard regulation with dreams of shielding prone groups nationwide. Our annual Pinewood Justice Festival drew hundreds celebrating community, overcome person evil. Local companies donated proceeds to criminal defense budget supporting other neighborhoods combat corruption. Walt's bluegrass band headlined, at the same time as Pat Donnelly ran packed workshops on financial crime research that had helped residents in 47 states pick out and prosecute HOA fraud. The pageant combined celebration with education through our Community Useful Resource Center, assisting neighborhoods understand harassment patterns, report economic crimes, those and investigations. 41 copycat criminals have been arrested using our model, saving lots of households from Bryn's fate. My judicial profession had earned national recognition for retaining ethics underneath intense stress, leading to speaking engagements at regulation schools, approximately protective community rights, whilst retaining judicial integrity. The Yankee Bar Association created the Blackwood Award, spotting judges who proven courage defending civil rights against systematic oppression. But non-public victory intended greater than expert popularity. Gavel had recovered absolutely, now ruling our rebuilt sanctuary with tomcat authority that might intimidate federal marshals. The memorial lawn bloomed extra magnificently than ever. Harold's roses thriving in soil, enriched by using community love, and protected by way of protection, making sure no future terrorism. This evening, Golden Sundown streamed through new windows as I reviewed scholarship programs, even as Gib Voel supervised from his throne. Outside, Pat tended her victory lawn. Walt taught community children harmonica. And households gathered for conversations that Bryn's reign of terror had once made not possible. The mild sound of children's laughter had replaced sirens and confrontation, proving justice wasn't just punishment. It becomes safety, recuperation, and wish for futures unfastened from suburban predators. And remember that bullies best win whilst proper human beings lie silent. Your horror story should end up someone else's salvation. Drop a remark sharing your very own HOA nightmare. You're virtually no longer by myself in fighting these suburban dictators. And damage that subscribe button for HOA memories due to the fact subsequent week we're destroying the tax assessor who attempted stealing an entire community for personal profit. That revenge became similarly biblical, and the federal fees were surely beautiful. Together, we're constructing communities in which justice wins and criminals lose permanently. That's a wrap for modern episode on HOA Testimonies. If you love looking karma in action, ruin that like button, remark your thoughts, and allow us to recognize in case you've handled OA insanity too. Woo-way insanity too. Subscribe so that you might not pass over the subsequent HOA meltdown we put up.